Hello, welcome to Historically Drinking. I'm Sarah, and this week we're asking the question, why do rappers like cognac so much? And of course, we'll be making a cocktail to go along with the content. This week's cocktail is the Brandy Scoffa, which is a recipe from a book, from the first cocktail book written by a black bartender. So here we go. If you like boozy history, if you like videos about drinking and about history, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button right beneath the video screen. After you hit the subscribe button, hit the little notification bell afterwards, and then you'll get notified every time we put a new video up on YouTube. All right, let's get started with our drink. First, we need our glass. I'm using a cordial glass, is what this is called. But you could use any small glass. If it's more narrow, it's going to work better for making a layered drink, which is what we're making today. Now we're using 3 different spirits for this. And how it works with layered drinks is that you want to put the heaviest thing in first and then the lightest thing in last. And what makes things heavy is sugar content. So if something has a high sugar content, you want that to be at the bottom of the drink. And then alcohol content. If it has a high alcohol content, then it's going to be lighter. So you want to put that more up near the top of the drink. So we're starting with the Luxardo Maraschino, which has a lower alcohol content. It has a lot of sugar. And then we'll be doing our green Chartruesse, which has both a high sugar content and high alcohol content. So it's sandwiched right in the middle. And then our Pierre Ferrand Cognac, which has higher alcohol content, low sugar content. All right, so here we go. First, our Luxardo Maraschino. I'm pouring 1/2 ounce of this. And next, the green Chartreuse. I'm using my spoon. I'm going to pour onto the back of the spoon, and I want to just have the tip of the spoon barely touching the spirit beneath it. Oh, perfect. Here we go. And next, our cognac. Again, 1.5 ounces of this. I lied. 1/2 ounce. All right, there we are. It's layered. Perfect. Here you go. I don't know how well you can see in the camera there. We've got the nice distinct layers of brown, green, and clear. Now, I could drink this just like this, but what's going to happen? I'm going to get a layer of cognac. And then some green Chartreuse is going to come through after that, and then some Maraschino. The flavors are not going to be all blended together. It looks pretty, but it doesn't drink pretty, if you will. So I'm going to mix it all together. There. It's still so pretty. That is much better with them all mixed together. But you know what I really want to do? And all respect to Tom Bullock and his recipe, I just want to throw this over a little bit of ice. There's a lot of alcohol in this. Yeah. That's it. Here we go. Whew, now that we've got that settled, let's try and answer this question about rappers and their love for cognac. Before we go on, I did want to mention the book that this is from is called The Ideal Bartender, and it was released in 1917. Tom Bullock was the writer of the book, and as I said, this is the first cocktail book that was ever written and released by a black bartender. Now, 1917 is the same year that the United States entered into World War I. And that's relevant to our story because soldiers have a lot to do with this. Now, for World War I, 13% of soldiers were of African American descent, while the overall population of African Americans in the U.S. was 10% of the larger population. Now, there were varying reactions to these African American soldiers being in the Army. Within the black community, there was a lot of pride for these soldiers. But within the white community, specifically the Southern white community, there was a much different attitude. Sort of the same discriminatory attitudes were applied to these soldiers, even though they were soldiers. When they were enlisted in the Army, they were frequently given not current uniforms, but instead old Civil War uniforms. And they would also only be given one uniform, which meant that they had no uniform to change into while they were doing their washing up, for instance. They were also lodged outside in tents while the white soldiers were inside barracks. They would be fed outside. They, of course, were having to eat separately at the bases in the South from the white soldiers, and they would be fed outside no matter the weather. They'd sleep outside in their tents, be fed outside, much different treatment than their white counterparts. Also, what was different was that they were much more likely to be used for labor and not for combat. And while the Caucasian soldiers were getting sent overseas to fight, frequently the African American soldiers were just kept back home. Now, when the African American soldiers did get to go fight abroad, it was seen as an honor, but they were not given the same preparation as the white soldiers. The white soldiers tended to get much more training before being thrown into active combat. Now, the black soldiers that did get to go overseas, back home in the States, they were still victims of the same propaganda campaigns that just regular black people were victims of here. Campaigns saying that they were cowardly in the face of the enemy, saying that the black soldiers were raping white women in France. And there was no truth behind these stories. It was just all stories to make people look bad. Now, the black troops that landed in France, they landed to a much different type of experience than they had back home in the States. They were given a lot more respect. Not that there weren't still some racial issues in France. There are, and that's always going to be a thing. But they were still treated much differently, with much more respect, and without the divisions that they were used to back home in the U.S. Military officials did not like the way the French were treating the black soldiers. So what the U.S. military officials did was they asked the French to stop treating the black soldiers with familiarity and indulgence. The French people in charge, though, they didn't do it. They basically gave big FU to the government of the United States and said, no, we're going to treat these soldiers the way that we think they should be treated. And that's what they did. In fact, 171 black soldiers were awarded the French Legion of Honor. Soldiers that were not commended with any honors back home in the United States. Now, along with all of this respect, soldiers were enjoying something else. They were enjoying the French homegrown spirit, Cognac. Now, American drinking culture was largely about bourbon at this time, and African Americans had been very important in the development of bourbon, particularly as enslaved people. They had helped with the actual production, but also development of recipes, really getting bourbon off the ground, but with all of this labor being uncredited. And then once bourbon started to be marketed as a product, it was marketed in a way that I think would have been quite off-putting to the African American community at the time, with a lot of like Confederate packaging, like Confederate flags, Confederate soldiers on labels, just a lot of things that I think could have been a pretty big turn off. So at this point in time, black people weren't really drinking bourbon. There was, however, a history between African American enslaved people and Cognac. What happened was in the days before the Civil War was fought, in the South, it was often the black enslaved men who were the bartenders for the rich estate holders. So you would find a black man that became famous for making concoctions for the parties of the people that owned them. They became so famous that they would be rented out to other people to throw parties and have these famous enslaved bartenders make drinks for them. And one of the things that was most common to make and be famous for was the mint julep, which at this point in time would have been made with cognac. And in fact, cognac would have been hugely popular along with rum, but cognac would have been the most popular spirit amongst the elite population. So these enslaved black bartenders and those who became free even at this time would have been using cognac. So it's something that there was already some familiarity with. To learn more about these men during this time, you can watch a previous episode of Historically Drinking called From Enslaved to Free Men, A History of Black Bartenders. I'll link that at the end of this episode. Now, so after this bit of history that we've talked about, and 2 world wars that saw the presence of black soldiers in France, and then a period in between the wars that saw many black artists moving to France to escape the racism present in the US, the African American population had developed quite an affinity for cognac. And today, then and today, the vast majority of cognac was being exported to the US. Cognac producers were very cognizant that the United States was the market for this product. They picked up on the fact that it was popular among African Americans, and whereas the bourbon producers were marketing in such a way to alienate those drinkers, the cognac producers started marketing in such a way to embrace those drinkers, to draw them in. They began advertising in the 1950s in Ebony and Jet magazine. Hennessy was the first. And this may have been the first targeted marketing to African Americans of a hard spirit. Now, rap emerged in the black community in the 1970s. And as it spread across the country and grew in popularity, it gave voice to the Black experience, which, as we've just discussed, included drinking cognac. Then on November 7th, 2001, rapper Busta Rhymes released Pass the Cavassier. And more members of the rap community followed suit, releasing songs that had references to cognac in them. And it hasn't stopped, this relationship between cognac and Black rappers. Cognac producers are still working with rappers to promote their cognac brands, and it's still widely, hugely popular amongst the African American community. So there you go. That's why rappers legitimately have an affinity for cognac. There's something really solid behind it. All right, thank you for watching this episode. I would like to thank Wild Gypsy Cuisine. One of her videos inspired me to do this when she talked about the history of African American enslaved people and bourbon. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't like this video, hit the thumbs down button. Either way, comment. I would love to hear what you think or what you want to add. And if you really like this video and want to help historically drinking out, then share it with your friends. Thanks for being here. See you next time. Cheers.